What if a building could hold silence so deep that people still hear it decades later? What if a prison was built not just to lock doors, but to enter the human mind? Many left. Everything begins with an idea about punishment. In 1829, a new prison in Philadelphia promised to reform criminals through silence rather than public punishment. The theory sounded humane, but its true test would occur inside stone walls. Eastern State Penitentiary in Performity was designed in a radial pattern where long corridors would extend our guardixation. Isolation was the core philosophy of this prison. The Pennsylvania system required every prisoner to live completely alone. No shared meals, no shared labor, and no communication between inmates. Each cell included a skylight above, allowing light to fall directly from the ceiling. Designers believed the light symbolized constant observation and moral judgment. Arrival at the prison removed identity from the prisoner. Prisoners were sometimes moved through corridors with their heads covered so they could not see the building layout or other inmates. Isolation began immediately upon arrival. Solitude shaped every hour inside the prison. Prisoners performed labor alone in their cells, producing simple goods like shoes and baskets. Work filled the hours but did not break the isolation. Meals arrived without conversation. Food trays were passed through narrow openings to prevent interaction. Even eating reinforced the system of silence. Silence was strictly enforced throughout the prison. Prisoners were forbidden to communicate with each other. Guards want to enforce silence. They ensured isolators remained intact. Many prisoners began experiencing wisdom by subtractivity during long shifts of arraignment. The experiment in solitude produced consequences the designers had not fully predicted. The outside world soon began studying the prison. Visitors from across the United States and Europe traveled to Philadelphia to observe Eastern State Penitentiary. What they saw witnessed soon the future of criminals debate. Fame quickly spread beyond Philadelphia. Reformers, architects, and government officials traveled from Europe to observe this unusual prison system. Many believed they were seeing the future of criminal justice. One visitor, the English writer Charles Dickens, visited Eastern State Penitentiary in 10th century. His observations would later be one of the most influential endings of the prison. Dickens reached a disturbing conclusion. He believed prolonged solitary confinement highly damaged the human mind. In his writings, he described the suffering as psychological rather than physical. Debate soon spread across the Atlantic. Doctors, prison officials, and reform advocates began debating whether strict isolation truly reformed criminals or quietly caused mental harm. Eastern State Penitentiary housed prisoners for decades, even if it began to subvade and continue to operate. All concern was to be able permanent restitution. Life inside the prison tested both body and mind. Prisoners spent long hours inside narrow stone cells where temperature and isolation intensified the experience of confinement. Punishment sometimes extended beyond isolation. Prisoners who violated rules could be placed in darker punishment areas where light and comfort were reduced even further. Discipline remained strict throughout the prison's operation. For time, the original system began to weaken. Increasing prisoner populations made strict solitary confinement difficult to maintain. Administrators gradually allowed more shared labor and interaction. The prison continued expanding as decades passed. New buildings and additional cell blocks were constructed to accommodate the growing prison population. The original architectural design gradually evolved into a larger complex. One prisoner would later become especially famous. The well-known American gangster Al Capone served time inside Eastern State Penitentiary during the 20th century, adding a layer of public fascination to the already famous prison. The presence of a famous inmate drew public attention. Al Capone arrived at Eastern State Penitentiary in 1929 after a conviction related to illegal weapons possession. His living space became a topic of curiosity. Capone's prison cell reportedly contained furniture and decorative items that made it appear more comfortable than the typical stone cell surrounding it. Most prisoners lived under far harsher conditions. Daily prison life still followed strict routines of confinement and surveillance to families of prisoners. By the mid-20th century, many parts of the prison were deteriorating. Cracked plaster, rusted bars, and aging utilities signaled the decline of the once revolutionary institution. The end of the prison's active life approached quietly. After more than a century of operation, Eastern State Penitentiary closed in 1971. Prisoners were transferred, leaving the structure empty for the first time in generations. Most prisoners lived under far harsher conditions. Daily prison life still followed strict routines of confinement, labor, and surveillance. Famous inged the overall presence. Over the years, rainwater, vegetation, and weather slowly transformed parts of the prison. Plants grew through cracks in stone, and sections of roof collapsed. In the late 20th century, the abandoned prison began attracting curious visitors, including urban explorers, photographers, and historians. The building's eerie silence created an unsettling atmosphere. Strange reports soon began circulating. Visitors and workers described unusual experiences inside the abandoned prison. Some reported hearing footsteps, distant voices, or sudden cold air moving through empty cell blocks, but also for its reputation as one of the most haunted prisons in the United States. stories of unexplained activity began spreading among visitors and investigators. Certain areas of the prison began attracting more attention than others. Visitors frequently mentioned unusual sensations in specific sections. Certain cell blocks seemed to generate more reports than others. Visitors often describe feelings of unease inside this section of the prison, including sensations of being watched or sudden changes in temperature. Another section often mentioned in reports of things claimed to see shadow-like movement incident to the shallow when ran weaver and most steriliz accounts, whether caused. Some stories describe sudden changes in the atmosphere of the building. Individuals report cold spots, unusual sounds, or brief sensations of movement behind them when walking through the abandoned corridors.
Reports the
Eastern State Penitentiary is a
historic landmark
and as a location frequently associated with Paranormal investigation, knowing to influence visitor investigations. One story in particular helped shape the prison's haunted reputation. A maintenance worker was restoring old locks in a cell block when he encountered a large, rusted mechanism that seemed to move on its own. The worker attempted to open a long, sealed lock. As the old lock was turned open, the worker experienced a sudden and intense sensation of movement inside the corridor. The worker reportedly felt as if an unseen force had moved past him after the lock was opened. Whether real or imagined, the account became one of the most widely repeated stories connected to the prison. Stories like this spread quickly among visitors. Over time, many arrived already aware of these accounts. Expectation and atmosphere shaped how people experienced the building. Yet the question of what people truly experience remains unresolved. Some researchers believe the prison's architecture, history, and silence naturally influence perception. For decades, investigators have attempted to document unusual activity inside the prison. Paranormal investigators have visited Eastern State Penitentiary to study the reports of unexplained sounds and sensations. Investigators sometimes use recording devices or detectors exploring the buildings and then understand some statistics storing when the narrative both are explored. Most investigations produce uncertain results. While investigators sometimes record unusual sounds or temperature changes, clear explanations are often difficult to confirm. The prison's architecture influences human perception. Long corridors, repeating doors, and dim lighting can create visual illusions and echo patterns that alter how people experience the space. Even so, the mystery continues attracting attention. The combination of history, architecture, and unanswered questions continues to shape its reputation. After years of abandonment, preservation efforts began to take shape. Historians and groups worked to stabilize the deteriorating structure during the late 20th century. The goal was preservation rather than restoration. The teams chose to stabilize the ruins so visitors could see the building's aging structure and historical layers. The prison eventually reopened to the public as a historic site. Visitors can now walk through the abandoned corridors and learn about its history. Historical interpretation is now part of the experience. Exhibits and guided tours explore the prison's history, its experimental system of solitary confinement, and its influence on correctional philosophy. Easier Today represents an important chapter in the history of criminal justice. Its walls preserve the story of an experiment that shaped how societies think about punishment and reform. Prison's influence extended far beyond its walls. Eastern State Penitentiary inspired the construction of many other prisons around the world that adopted elements of its architectural and philosophical design. The prison's legacy continues influencing modern discussion. Debates about prison reform, mental health, and solitary confinement often reference the blessed complexity of Eastern State Penitentiary. The building itself still shapes how people feel inside it. The prison's architecture still influences perception through its narrow passages, heavy doors, and echoing chambers. Visitors often describe a strong sense of presence. Many people walking through the abandoned corridors report feeling as though someone is nearby even when the hallways are empty. Psychologists offer possible explanations. Environments with repeating patterns, dim lighting, and powerful historical associations can strongly influence human perception and emotional response. While many experiences inside the prison can be explained by architecture or psychology, some reports remain difficult to fully interpret. Eastern State Penitentiary today exists both as a preserved historic landmark and as a place where stories of the past continue shaping how people experience the present. Time has not erased the prison's influence. Eastern State Penitentiary continues to influence discussions about punishment, architecture, and psychological confinement. The prison now exists primarily as memory. Although the building stands empty of prisoners, its design and history continue shaping public understanding of incarceration. Visitors continue returning to the site each year. Thousands of people now walk through the historic structure to learn about its past and experience its atmosphere firsthand. The building continues raising difficult questions. Historians and researchers still debate the true consequences of the prison's solitary confinement system. The prison remains silent, but its story continues. Eastern State Penitentiary now stands as a reminder of how powerful ideas about justice can shape real lives and real structures. The prison's silence often becomes the most powerful presence inside it. Visitors frequently describe the building as unusually quiet compared to other historic structures. Many researchers believe the building itself influences perception. The prison's design amplifies echoes, shadows, and temperature shifts that can affect how people experience the space. Yet the emotional weight of history remains difficult to ignore. Thousands of prisoners once lived within these walls under conditions designed to isolate their minds from the outside world. Stories of unexplained sensations persist not only because of mystery, but because the prison's past still echoes through its structure. And the building remains standing, unchanged in its quiet watch. Eastern State Penitentiary today continues to exist as both a historical monument and a place where unanswered questions still linger. The prison's corridors now belong to memory. The empty structure functions as a preserved reminder of how societies once believed isolation could reshape human behavior. Every structure preserves the intentions of the people who built it. Eastern State Penitentiary was built with the belief that architecture itself could guide moral transformation. Yet human behavior proved more complex than design. The prison became both an experiment in reform and a warning about the psychological effects of extreme isolation. The building now stands between history and interpretation. Visitors continue debating whether the prison is remembered primarily for its architectural innovation, its psychological experiment, or the stories that followed after its closure. State Penitentiary was built to change human behavior through silence and isolation. The experiment ended long ago, yet the structure remains standing, preserving the echoes of that belief. Subscribe for more true places, real history, and the unanswered stories still waiting in the dark.